My mother called me on the morning of December 22nd to tell me that my children and I were not welcome at Christmas. Not in a roundabout way, not with any softening around the edges. She said it the way Helena Matthews has always delivered bad news, with the breezy efficiency of someone reading a grocery list. Sienna. Her voice came through the phone crisp and certain, the way it always did when she had already decided something and was simply informing me of the outcome. I need you to listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once and I don't want any drama. I was standing at the kitchen island of my penthouse apartment, one hand wrapped around a mug of black coffee, the other pressing flat against the cold white marble of the counter. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was just beginning to wake up. Gray light spreading thin across the skyline, the first hints of sunrise catching on the glass of 100 buildings below me. I'm listening, I said. You and the children won't be joining us in Aspen this year. I set my coffee mug down. Mom, it's December 22nd. I know what day it is. A pause, the faint sound of her moving through a room, heels against hardwood. Your sister is bringing Colton. You know who Colton is. I did know who Colton was. Elodie had been talking about him for 6 months. Senior VP at Hargrove Asset Management, old money family from Connecticut, a man who had, according to my mother's repeated assessments, the kind of pedigree that could set Elodie up for life if she played her cards correctly. He comes from a very different world, Sienna. He's used to a certain caliber of environment, a certain standard, and I don't meet that standard. Don't put words in my mouth. She exhaled the way she always did when she thought I was being deliberately obtuse. You have 2 small children. Leo is 6, Maya is 4. You know how they are at this age. They're loud and they spill things and they run into rooms and knock things over, and I simply cannot have that energy in the house when we're trying to make a particular impression. I didn't say anything. I looked out at the city below me and I waited. And frankly, she continued, because Helena Matthews always had and frankly. Your whole situation isn't exactly the image we need to be projecting right now. You're a single mother, Sienna, and I know that's not your fault, but it is what it is. Colton's family is very traditional. He doesn't need to be sitting across from someone who's, she searched briefly for the word, struggling. I see. I knew you'd understand. You've always been the sensible one. This was her highest compliment, delivered with the warmth of a weather report. Stay home, enjoy the holiday with the kids, order something nice. We'll call after New Year's when things settle down. Of course, I said. I hope you all have exactly the Christmas you deserve. There was a small beat of silence. Something in my tone she almost caught, almost registered. But Helena Matthews has never been terribly interested in the subtext of other people's emotions, particularly mine. Thank you, Sienna. Goodbye. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment with the phone in my hand and the city spread out beneath me, and I felt the familiar weight of it, that specific, hollowing sensation I had learned to live with over 36 years of being the wrong daughter, the inconvenient one, the one who required too much accommodation, took up too much space, failed to reflect the family back at itself in the way it wanted to be seen. My name is Sienna Matthews. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. The phone rang again before I even set it down. The name on the screen, Ethan Brooks, Meridian HQ. I tapped the screen and pressed it to my ear. Good morning, Ethan. Morning, Madam Founder. His voice was professional and clipped, the way it always was before 8 a.m. I could hear the hum of the office behind him, the low murmur of a building already in motion. I have updates on 3 fronts. Do you want them in order of urgency or in order of how much you're going to enjoy them? Despite everything, I smiled. Enjoyment. Excellent choice. I heard the click of a keyboard. The Hargrove acquisition closed at 9:02 this morning. All 31 board members have been formally notified. Legal has the restructuring documents drafted and ready for your review on January 2nd. The Hargrove executive team has been, and I'm quoting from the internal memo here, requesting an emergency meeting at the earliest possible opportunity. Hargrove Asset Management, one of the oldest mid-sized investment firms in the Northeast. the kind of company that traded on the weight of its name and the length of its history, and had grown comfortable enough in that comfort to miss 3 consecutive quarters of positioning moves that my team had been watching for 2 years. We had moved through a shell company called Blackridge Holdings, kept the whole thing clean and quiet, and finalized the purchase in the pre-dawn hours of December 24th. Tell them January 2nd, I said. They can spend the holidays thinking about it. Already drafted the response. Second front. Your Gulfstream is fueled and ready at Westfield Private Terminal. Wheels up at 2 p.m. Claire has both kids packed and ready. Leo's building blocks are in the second carry-on. Maya's stuffed elephant is in her backpack and she will not let go of it, so don't let anyone try to check it. I laughed quietly. Understood. And third, the Aspen estate has been fully prepared. The house manager confirmed this morning that the Christmas trees are decorated to your specifications, the kitchen is stocked, and Chef Renata arrived last night. She's already made Leo's favorite soup. I walked from the kitchen island toward the windows and stood looking out at the city, at the grid of streets and rooftops going on in every direction. Somewhere beneath all of it were people scrambling through the last days before Christmas, buying things, wrapping things, making reservations, sending messages they'd been putting off sending. My mother was probably somewhere in Boston right now, packing for Aspen with one eye on her checklist and the other on how everything would look. I looked down at my right hand. On my ring finger, not the left, never the left again, sat a piece of jewelry I wore every single day without exception. A signet ring in white gold, custom made, the face engraved with the crest of Meridian Capital Group. A stylized compass rose bisected by a single vertical line, clean and exact. There were only 3 rings like this in the world. I wore one. My general counsel wore one. The third sat in a lockbox in my office. It was not a piece of jewelry that appeared in any photograph or any profile or any mention of me in any publication, because there were no photographs or profiles or mentions of me in any publication. That was a choice I had made deliberately and maintained carefully for 10 years. Ethan, I said. Yes, Madam Founder? Take the rest of the week off. You've earned it. A pause. Then, warmly. Merry Christmas, Sienna. Merry Christmas. I ended the call and stood for a moment longer at the window. Then I turned away from the city and walked down the hall toward the sound of my children. The playroom at the far end of the apartment faced east, and in the mornings it filled with light in a way that always stopped me in the doorway for a second before I went in. Not because it was particularly beautiful, though it was, but because of what was in it. Leo was on the floor with his wooden blocks, constructing something elaborate and vertical that he had been working on in one form or another for the better part of a week. He had a habit of describing his buildings to himself as he built them. A running commentary delivered in the serious, informative tone of a documentary narrator. And this is the main support structure, he was saying to no one in particular, placing a long, flat piece across 2 towers with great precision. Without this piece, the whole thing falls down. That's why you have to be very careful. Maya was in the corner armchair with her stuffed elephant, a gray, floppy-eared creature she had named Peanut despite the fact that Peanut was approximately the size of a throw pillow, conducting what appeared to be a very important meeting. She was speaking in the low, confidential tone she used for serious business. Claire, the children's nanny, was sorting through a basket of art supplies at the craft table, glancing up at both of them with the easy attentiveness of someone who had learned to keep watch without hovering. Hey, you two. Leo looked up. Mom, come see. I made the central atrium. That's incredible. I crouched down beside him, genuinely looking. How did you get this part to balance? Weight distribution. He said it with complete confidence. You have to spread the weight so no one part holds too much. Otherwise, he made a collapsing gesture with both hands and a sound effect to accompany it. I looked at my 6-year-old son and I thought, he's going to be fine. Whatever comes next, he's going to be fine. Maya appeared at my shoulder. Mom, I'm having a meeting. I can see that. Who's attending? Peanut and 2 invisible colleagues. Very important. Very. She nodded gravely. I put one hand on each of their heads for a moment, just a second, just the warmth of them, and then I looked up at Claire. We're leaving at 12:30 for the airport. Can you have the winter gear packed by noon? Already started, Claire said. I found Maya's snow boots under the bed. There was a spider near them, Maya said, not looking up from her meeting. I relocated it. Good decision. I stood up. Leo, we're going to Aspen tonight. He looked up from his construction, and the expression on his face, pure, uncomplicated joy, the kind adults have to work hard to remember, hit me somewhere in the chest the way it always did. The snow house? The snow house. He set down his block very carefully, as though not wanting to disturb the universe while processing this information. Then he looked at me with his father's eyes, dark brown, careful, precise, and said, "Is anyone else coming?" The question landed gently, but it landed. "No," I said, "just us." He seemed to consider this for a moment. "That's okay," he said finally. "That's actually better." Kids know more than we give them credit for. We boarded at 2 p.m, and by 2:15 the city had dropped away beneath us and there was nothing out the oval window but pale winter sky. Leo was at the window seat with his nose pressed against the glass, narrating the cloud formations to Maya, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder 20 minutes into the flight with Peanut tucked under her arm. I opened my laptop. There were 47 unread emails. I worked through them methodically, approving the restructuring outline for Hargrove, signing off on a commercial property transfer in Denver, reviewing the Q1 projections for a residential development in Charleston. Work that most people would have set aside for the holiday. Work that, for me, had never felt separate from life, because it was my life, the thing I had built with my own hands when there was nothing else to build with. 10 years ago, I had walked into a meeting with my father with a business plan in a manila folder and a loan application that needed one signature. One, a co-signer on a modest startup loan. I had the collateral, the plan, the projections. I just needed someone to stand behind me. Trevor Matthews had looked at the folder for approximately 45 seconds, pushed it back across the table and said, "You're not a good investment, Sienna. You have 2 kids under 5 and no business track record. I'm not putting my name on this." The following day, he had liquidated a portion of his retirement account to put a down payment on a Porsche for Elodie's 22nd birthday. I had driven home from that meeting, and I had sat in my car in the parking garage of my apartment building for about 20 minutes, and then I had gone upstairs and fed my children dinner, and the next morning I had started making phone calls. I didn't build Meridian Capital Group out of spite. I want to be honest about that. I built it because I had something to prove. Yes. But more than that, I built it because I looked at my children and I understood with absolute clarity that no one else was going to build it for me. 80-hour weeks, office space in a converted warehouse, a team of 3 people who believed in the plan when the plan was still mostly just a plan. 1 small commercial property, then 2, then 6, a private equity arm, a residential development division. Partnerships I cultivated carefully over years and executed without error. The Hargrove acquisition, completed this morning, had been 4 years in the making. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the mountains beginning to appear on the horizon. White peaks cutting into a sky that had gone the deep, particular blue of late afternoon in winter. Leo had fallen asleep next to his sister, both of them curled together in the wide leather seat like they had settled into each other naturally, the way siblings do. I let myself sit with that for a moment, just that. While we were somewhere above the Rockies, 400 miles away in Aspen, my family's careful fiction was beginning to unravel. They had flown commercial, a connecting flight through Denver that my mother had complained about extensively in the family group chat, which I was technically still a member of despite not having responded to a message there in 7 months. Helena had wanted to project an image of seamless, effortless wealth, which meant arriving at the rental property before Colton and having everything arranged perfectly. Trevor had rented an SUV. Ryan was in the back with Alexandra Reed, his girlfriend of 8 months, and beside Alexandra sat Elodie, applying lip gloss in the reflection of her phone screen and saying, for what was apparently the 4th or 5th time, that the drive was taking forever and her feet were already cold. Alexandra Reed was 35 years old. She was a partner at Reed & Sullivan LLP, a boutique firm specializing in corporate mergers and commercial real estate transactions. She had graduated first in her law school class, built her practice from the ground up, and had a mind that cataloged information the way other people cataloged grievances. Automatically, permanently, and with perfect recall. She had been dating Ryan Matthews for 8 months. In those 8 months, she had paid for approximately 60% of their shared expenses, listened to an uncountable number of stories about Ryan's upcoming exits on various investment positions, and had received 2 months ago a promise ring that Ryan had presented to her over dinner with the confidence of someone certain of what they were offering. She had accepted it because at the time she had believed him. Or, perhaps more accurately, she had wanted to believe him. There is a difference, and Alexandra knew the difference better than most people, and had been sitting with that knowledge quietly for several weeks. She looked out the window of the SUV at the mountains and said nothing. Pull up, Richard. It should be the next left. Helena had the directions open on her phone, one manicured finger hovering over the screen. The cabin, which Helena had described in the family chat as our little mountain retreat, had been rented for 3 days at a rate that had required maxing out the first of what turned out to be 3 credit cards. It was, by all available pictures, a beautiful property, timber frame construction, a stone fireplace, a wraparound deck with views of the valley. Trevor pulled the SUV into the driveway and stopped in front of the door. He got out, punched in the rental code. The panel flashed red. He tried again, slower, more deliberate. Red. What's taking so long? Elodie's window went down, letting in a rush of December air that made her immediately recoil. My toes are literally losing feeling. The code isn't working. Trevor tried a 3rd time, then rattled the handle with increasing force, as though the door might respond to conviction if not to accuracy. Helena called the property management number. The conversation that followed lasted approximately 90 seconds, and by the end of it, the confident, manicured authority in her voice had given way to something thinner and higher pitched. She lowered the phone. They canceled the booking. Inside the SUV, silence. My card didn't go through for the final payment. They tried twice. The system automatically released the property. Elodie, what does that mean? Helena, it means we don't have anywhere to stay. She said it the way someone says something they are not fully processing yet, the words arriving in the mouth before the brain has caught up to their implications. Elodie's response was immediate and operatic. She kicked the back of Trevor's seat. She declared that her life was over. She said, not entirely incorrectly, that Colton was arriving tomorrow morning and believed the family owned a ski lodge, and that the gap between that belief and the reality of 4 people sitting in a rental SUV in a stranger's driveway in 17-degree weather was not a gap she was prepared to bridge. Trevor tried 2 more cards, both declined. Ryan had been quiet through all of this, looking at his phone. Now he looked up. Wait. He said it in the tone of someone who has just had an idea they aren't entirely sure is good. Sienna said she was bringing the kids to Aspen this year. I still have her location shared from last summer. She asked me to track her flight when I was picking up Leo from the airport in June. She never turned it off. Helena turned around in her seat. Where is she? Ryan turned the phone so she could see. The blue dot sat squarely in the middle of what the map labeled, unhelpfully but accurately, as the Northern Residential Mountain District. She's probably at some budget rental, Helena said. You know how she is, practical to a fault, but it doesn't matter. It's Christmas Eve, and family is family, and she can't turn us away. She literally just, Alexandra started. Family, Helena repeated with the finality of someone closing a door. Ryan, get me that address. Alexandra looked out the window again. The mountains sat in the early dark, indifferent and immovable, and she pressed her lips together and said nothing. The drive took 20 minutes up a winding road that climbed steadily away from the town center, away from the ski lodges and the holiday storefronts and the restaurants with their warm yellow windows, up into a part of Aspen where the properties sat far back from the road behind gates and tree lines and the particular kind of quiet that wealth buys when it has enough of it. Helena kept commenting on how far out it was. Ryan said the GPS was showing them correctly and he was sure of it. Elodie had stopped crying and started doing something on her phone that required intense concentration. Trevor drove in the tight-shouldered silence of a man who has made too many wrong turns to count but will not accept navigation assistance. Alexandra watched the addresses change as they climbed. She had worked in high-end commercial real estate law for 11 years. She knew these neighborhoods, not personally, but professionally, the kinds of properties that appeared in the documents on her desk. She had a specific, trained eye for architectural tells. The way a driveway was engineered, the gauge of a gate, the particular language of a building that knew exactly what it was worth. The properties they were passing were not vacation rentals. Stop, Ryan said. It should be right here. Trevor stopped the SUV. In front of them, set into a stone pillar on either side of the driveway, was a pair of iron gates. Each one stood 12 feet high. They were not decorative. They were the kind of gates that meant something. Beyond them, up a long, heated driveway lined with snow-covered pines, sat a house. To call it a house is technically accurate in the same way that calling the Pacific Ocean a large puddle is technically accurate. It was constructed from custom-cut granite and steel and floor-to-ceiling panels of glass that caught the last of the fading winter light. It sat on what was clearly a significant acreage of mountain property, lit from within by the warm, amber glow of a building that was very much alive and occupied. A stone chimney breathed white smoke into the dark blue sky. Nobody spoke. Then Helena said slowly, "That can't be right." "That's the exact coordinate," Ryan said. "She's house-sitting," Elodie said after a pause. "She must be house-sitting for some corporate person. You know how she networks. She probably offered to watch the place over the holidays in exchange for using it. She does things like that." And she said things like that the way you'd say, "She rescues stray cats," with a certain resigned affection for the harmless eccentricities of the less sophisticated. Before anyone could respond, something happened. A small camera mounted on the right-hand pillar rotated, slowly, precisely, until its lens was aimed directly at their license plate. 3 seconds passed. Then, with a low mechanical sound that carried clearly through the cold night air, the iron gates began to swing open. Alexandra stared at them. Her heart was doing something unusual, a specific kind of accelerating alertness that she recognized from courtrooms, from depositions, from the moment before a document is produced that changes everything. She looked at the gates. She looked at the driveway. She looked at the crest carved into the right-hand stone pillar. A stylized compass rose bisected by a clean vertical line, 2 initials below it in an elegant serif font. M.C. She had seen that crest before. She couldn't place it yet, couldn't pin down the context, but she had seen it, and the certainty of that recognition hummed through her with a frequency she trusted completely. "Drive in," Helena said. Trevor drove in. The driveway curved up through the pines, and the house expanded as they approached it, revealing itself in stages the way significant things do. A 3-car garage to the left, its doors closed, a garden under snow to the right, the outlines of careful landscaping visible beneath the white. Exterior lighting positioned to illuminate without exposing. And at the top of the drive, parked in front of the grand entrance, a single vehicle. A black armored SUV, understated and expensive, the kind of car that doesn't need to announce itself. Trevor parked behind it, cut the engine. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence outside was absolute, just wind through the pines and the faint pop of the cooling engine. Then the front door opened. She stood in the doorway with a ceramic mug of something warm in both hands, wearing a cashmere lounge set the color of cream, her dark hair pulled back simply. She looked out at them with an expression that gave away nothing at all. Elodie scrambled out of the car first, moving toward the door with the forward momentum of someone who has already decided how this conversation goes. "Okay, so I know this looks weird, but our rental fell through and it's literally an emergency and I just need you to..." She stopped, because the woman in the doorway had not moved, had not shifted her weight or adjusted her expression or shown any sign of the flustered surprise that Elodie had been expecting and, in some calcified part of her thinking, had been counting on. The rest of them got out of the car. Alexandra was the last one. She stepped out onto the stone driveway and pulled her coat tighter against the cold, and she looked at the house. Really looked at it, and her eyes moved from the roofline to the stonework to the pillar by the front steps and the smaller version of the crest inlaid there, and then to the woman in the doorway. Something inside Alexandra went very quiet and very precise. She looked at the mug in the woman's hands, at the ring on her right hand. White gold, a crest face, a compass rose. MC. The same letters, the same design. She had processed a commercial trust registration 2 years ago. A blind trust. The kind of entity structure used specifically to keep a beneficial owner's name out of public records. The trust had been registered under the name of Meridian Capital Group. She had signed the paperwork, filed it, and moved on. She had never met the person behind it, until tonight. Alexandra Reed stood in the cold on the driveway of an 8-figure estate on Billionaires Row in Aspen, and she looked at Sienna Matthews, who was looking back at her with the calm, unhurried patience of someone who has been waiting a very long time for the right moment, and she understood, with the sudden completeness of a key turning in a lock, exactly where she was. She understood who owned this house. She understood who her boyfriend's sister was. And in the cold, clear air of that December evening, with her breath misting in front of her and the iron gates closing slowly at the bottom of the drive, Alexandra Reed made a decision so swift and so certain that it barely felt like a decision at all. She was going to stay and watch every single thing that happened next. The silence that followed my sitting down at the head of that table was the kind that has texture to it. dense and pressurized, the way air gets before a storm breaks. Helena was the first to attempt speech. She had spent 58 years being the most powerful person in every room she occupied, and old habits are not surrendered without a fight. Sienna. Her voice had the particular quality of someone trying to locate their authority and finding it missing. I think we should all take a breath before anyone says anything. Trevor. I looked at my father. What did you say to me the morning I came to ask you to co-sign my startup loan? He blinked. That was a long time ago. What did you say? The table was very quiet. Trevor looked down at the tablecloth. He was a big man who had always used his size the way he used his voice, to take up more space than he strictly needed, to make rooms feel smaller, to remind people that he was present. He looked right now unexpectedly compact. I said it wasn't a good investment, he said. You said I wasn't a good investment. I kept my voice level. You had the loan documents in your hand for less than a minute. You pushed them back across the table and you told me I had no track record, no collateral worth considering, and that a single mother of 2 small children was not someone a serious person put their name behind. I paused. The next morning, you liquidated $22,000 from your retirement account to put a deposit on a Porsche for Elodie's birthday. Elodie said nothing. She was looking at the table. I'm not telling you this to punish you, I said. I'm telling you because my mother called me 3 days ago and told me that my children were a liability to her aesthetic, and I have been the liability in this family for 36 years, and I want you to understand clearly, completely, and finally what the liability has been building. Helena's mouth opened. I'm not finished, I said. Her mouth closed. Meridian Capital Group manages a portfolio of commercial and residential properties in 14 states. We have a private equity arm with 11 active positions. We completed our 15th acquisition this morning. I was not saying this to impress them. I was saying it because they had been allowed for too long to hold a picture of me in their minds that I had never corrected, and that picture had become the permission slip for everything that had happened tonight. I started with one property, a single commercial unit in a converted warehouse district, purchased with a bank loan I qualified for on my own, 9 months after you told me I wasn't worth signing for. Trevor was looking at me now, not with the expression he used when he wanted to appear commanding, with the expression of a man doing an arithmetic problem whose answer keeps coming out wrong. The house you're sitting in, I continued, is registered to a blind trust under the Meridian entity structure. I purchased it 3 years ago. It is worth, at current market valuation, $9 million. I let that sit for exactly 1 second. My mother told my children they were not welcome at Christmas because they would ruin the image she needed to present in this house, the house she was going to present as hers. I looked at Helena. I want you to understand what you said to me, and I want you to understand it in full. Helena's composure was working very hard. I could see the effort of it, the slight tension in her jaw, the way her hands were pressed flat on the table as though the pressure might anchor her. You have to understand, she said carefully, that we had no idea. I know you didn't. I said it without resentment because there wasn't any. What I felt was something cleaner than resentment. That's part of what I want you to understand tonight. You made every decision you made. About me, about my children, about who deserved what in this family, based on a story you told yourselves. And the story was wrong. The fire moved. The chandelier light fell across the table in its warm, indiscriminate way, touching everyone equally. Ryan had been very still through all of this. He was sitting with his forearms on the table and his eyes down, in the posture of someone enduring something they knew they deserved. Alexandra was watching him. It was Trevor who broke first, not Helena, which surprised me. I had always thought Helena would be the one to push back the hardest, to find some angle of counterattack that let her reframe the evening in her favor. But Trevor broke first, and he broke in the specific way of a man whose self-image has been load-bearing for decades and has just had the foundation pulled from beneath it. You built all of this yourself. He said it quietly, not as a question, as someone reading the words on a page and hearing them for the first time. Yes. Without anyone in this family, I said. There were other people, colleagues, 2 partners who believed in the plan early, an analyst named Patricia who worked nights for 18 months at half market salary because she believed we were building something real. I paused. Not family. Trevor looked at his glass. I should have signed the loan. Yes, I said. You should have. Nothing softened in me when I said it. I want to be honest about that. I had spent enough years waiting to feel the relief of his acknowledging it that I knew by now the relief was not going to come. Not in the form I had once hoped for, not in the form that would make the years feel retroactively different. The acknowledgement, when it arrived, was just a fact joining other facts. Trevor, Helena's voice was sharp. Don't what? He looked at his wife, and something in his face had shifted, a tiredness that had been underneath the bluster all evening and was now simply the face itself. Don't tell our daughter she was right. She built, he gestured at the room, the house, the whole impossible evening. She built this. We built things too, Helena said, but her voice had lost its certainty. It was finding the edges of the argument and not liking what it found. Did we? Trevor said. The question sat in the room. Then, from the other side of the table, the sound of a chair being pushed back. Alexandra stood up. She did not make a speech of it. She simply stood, and in standing she altered the room's center of gravity in the way that a certain kind of stillness, brought to its feet, invariably does. She straightened her dress. She placed her hands at her sides. She had the posture of someone who spends a significant portion of her professional life standing in rooms where the stakes are high and losing her composure is not an available option. She looked at Trevor. I want to address something you said a few minutes ago, she said. Her voice was measured and clear, carrying without needing to be raised. You implied that Sienna's success reflects on the values you instilled in her, that the family contributed to what she built. Trevor opened his mouth. I'm not finished. She said it without heat, just as a procedural fact the way she would say it in a deposition. Trevor closed his mouth. I have spent the last 8 months listening to a version of this family that I now understand was almost entirely fictional. She did not look at Ryan when she said this, though Ryan was looking at her with the focused, desperate attention of a man watching a door close. I was told about real estate holdings, investment portfolios, a family legacy that Ryan was actively building on. She paused. I paid for 60% of our shared expenses during this time because Ryan said his assets were in illiquid positions. I covered 2 vacations, 14 dinners, and... She stopped briefly, and in that brief stop was the only visible evidence of anything below the surface. And I accepted a ring that I was told was purchased with investment income. The ring. On her left hand, catching the candlelight. I ran a property and credit background check through my firm's legal database tonight, she said. The delinquency filings are public record. What I found is as follows. She spoke as though reading from a document, though she was reading from nothing. She had memorized it, the way she memorized everything. Trevor and Helena Matthews currently hold 3 liens against the family property in Boston. The first mortgage is 11 months in arrears. The second equity loan, taken 18 months ago and used based on the card statements in the public filing to fund a cryptocurrency platform that closed without generating revenue, is 9 months in arrears. The third loan, taken 14 months ago, is 4 months in arrears. She paused. The property is in active pre-foreclosure status. Helena made a sound. Additionally, Alexandra continued, the credit card cash advance used to fund the purchase of my engagement ring was drawn on a card in Helena's name 2 days before the card was reported delinquent. She looked down at her left hand. Ryan said very quietly, Alex. She looked at him then, directly, fully, with the whole of her attention. I want to be clear, she said, and her voice was the same as it had been throughout, even professional, controlled. Except that now, underneath the evenness, there was something that was not anger and not grief, but was the specific, quiet devastation of a person who has been genuinely fooled by someone they genuinely trusted and has decided, completely and irrevocably, what to do about it. I am not angry at you for not having money. I am not angry at you for your family's financial situation. Those things are complicated, and I understand complicated. She reached up with her right hand. I am ending this because you lied to me, consistently, specifically, and with enough detail to make the lies feel like truth. You let me carry this relationship financially for 8 months while performing the role of a man who didn't need carrying. You let your parents drain their retirement and mortgage their home, and then you let them take money from the bank that already owned your family's debt, and you let them use it to buy me a ring so I would believe the performance. She looked at the ring one last time. That is not a financial problem. That is a character problem. She slid the ring off her finger. She turned to Ryan's wineglass, which was sitting in front of his place setting, still half full with the dark burgundy. She held the ring over it, opened her fingers. The ring dropped into the wine with a small, clean sound. A sound that had a finality to it. The sound of something ending precisely the way well-made things sometimes end. "I don't date men who let their parents steal from their sisters," Alexandra said. She said it quietly, without performance. "I hope you find a way forward that you don't need to lie about." She picked up her coat from the back of her chair. She looked across the table at me, and in her look was a clear professional respect, the recognition of one person who has done difficult things by themselves for a long time for another person who has done the same. She gave me a single nod. Then she walked to the door of the dining room and out of it, and her footsteps went quiet down the hall, and she was gone. Ryan stared at the ring at the bottom of his wineglass. He stared at it for a long time. Nobody said anything. It was Helena who found her voice first. She looked older than she had at the beginning of the evening. It was not that anything physical had changed. Her dress was the same, her hair was the same, but the machinery behind her face had altered its operation, and what showed through was different. Not softer exactly, smaller. "We need help," she said. I looked at her. "We have nothing left." She said it plainly, without the performance she had used for everything else tonight. This at least was true. "The cards are maxed, the loans are in default, the house—" You heard what she said. Her voice broke briefly on the word house and then recovered. "We put everything into your brother and your sister because we believed—" "You believed they were the better investment," I said. She flinched. "I'm not saying it cruelly," I said. "I'm saying it because I want you to hear your own logic in plain language. You made decisions about which of your children deserved your resources based on which of them you thought would produce the best return. You were wrong about the return, and you were wrong about the math." I kept my voice even, but more than that, and this is the part I need you to actually hear, you were wrong about what your children needed from you, which was never money, which was never a cosign or a car or a Paris degree. I paused. It was to be treated as though our value was not conditional. Helena had both hands pressed to the edge of the table. Tears were moving down her face. Real ones, I believed, though I had seen Helena cry strategically enough times that I had learned to hold the belief lightly. "Please," she said, "we just need a loan, enough to stabilize. You have more than you could ever—" "I know," I said. "I know what I have." I reached down beside my chair. Since before dinner, against the leg of the chair that had been mine all along, the one I had not sat in until tonight, I had placed my work bag. I reached into it now and removed the folder I had been carrying for 6 months. It was a manila folder, thick, with a binder clip holding the pages together. I set it on the table in front of Trevor. He looked at it. "Open it," I said. His hands were not steady. He undid the binder clip and lifted the cover. The first page was a document on legal letterhead, a debt transfer agreement between a regional bank and an acquiring entity. The address in the header was the family home in Boston. The property described in the agreement was the property he had raised us in. He stared at it, turned the page, a notice of default, first occurrence, turned again, second notice, third notice. His hands had gone very still, as though the paper itself had a weight he hadn't anticipated. He turned to the final document in the stack. "Read the header. Read the name of the acquiring entity." His voice, when it came out, was barely a voice. "Blackridge Holdings." "Yes," I said. He looked up at me. "The Shell Company." "Meridian's acquisition vehicle. Yes." The understanding moved through his face slowly, the way cold moves through a building, finding every uninsulated place. "You bought our mortgage," he said. "I bought all 3 of your mortgages," I said, 6 months ago, when the bank packaged your delinquent debt and sold it to the secondary market. My portfolio managers flagged the listing as a distressed residential property in a historically valuable Boston neighborhood. It came through the standard acquisition pipeline. My approval was required because the purchase exceeded a threshold. When I saw the address, I signed off and I waited. Waited for what? Trevor's voice had lost everything that had been in it at the beginning of the evening. The booming confidence, the practiced authority, the performance of a man who knew how rooms worked. What was left was just the voice. "For this," I said. "For a moment to have this conversation. I had planned to come to Boston in January, to sit down with you and talk through what the documents meant and what I intended to do and give you a chance to hear it from me directly, without an audience, without Elodie's performance or Ryan's evasions. I paused. You came to me first. Helena had her face in her hands. The foreclosure filing, I said. My legal team has the paperwork drafted. It has been drafted for 3 weeks. I have not filed it. Trevor looked up. I haven't filed it, I said again, because filing it was never the goal. And I looked at him, at both of them, steadily and without malice, because malice had stopped being a part of this somewhere between taking off the apron and sitting down at the head of this table. The goal was to stop being the person this family called when they needed something and forgot when they didn't, to stop being the one who absorbs the cost of everyone else's choices with no acknowledgement and no accounting. I let that settle. The mortgage is leverage, yes, but I'm not telling you this because I want to watch you suffer. I'm telling you because I want you to understand, in concrete terms that cannot be reframed or diminished, that the daughter you discarded built the institution that now holds the deed to your home. I want that to be a fact, you know. Helena lifted her face from her hands. Her makeup had tracked down her cheeks in thin, dark lines. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you, I said. The foreclosure will not be filed if you agree to a structured repayment arrangement that my legal team will draft. The terms will be fair, below market rate, extended timeline. You will not lose the house if you commit to the agreement and honor it. I paused. That offer is available. It will remain available until January 15th. After that, my team proceeds with the filing. And us, Trevor said. He meant it simply, not manipulatively, not with hidden pressure. Just, what are we now? I thought about it honestly. I don't know, I said. I'm not closing a door, I'm closing a chapter. Whether another one opens depends on whether the things that happened in this chapter are things we can all actually account for. I looked at him. That is not tonight's conversation. Tonight's conversation is finished. I raised my hand and touched the small remote I had placed at the edge of the table before dinner. The door at the far end of the dining room opened. 4 members of my security team came in, not with aggression, not with theater. They came in the way trained professionals do a job, efficiently, quietly, with the minimal necessary display of authority. They were dressed in dark clothes and they moved to the perimeter of the room and they waited. Elodie, who had been silent for longer than I had ever known her to be silent in her adult life, made a sound in her throat and pushed back her chair. She had been cycling through something during the conversation. I could see it in the way she held herself, the way her eyes had moved from face to face as the evening dismantled itself. The anger was still there. The anger was, I suspected, the thing she would hold on to longest, because anger is easier to carry than shame. You planned this entire thing, she said. Her voice had the tight, high quality of someone fighting to hold a tone in place. You knew who Colton worked for. You let us come in here and make complete fools of ourselves because you wanted to watch it happen. I opened the gate, I said. Everything after that was yours. That's not... She stopped, started again. You sat there in that apron for hours pretending to be... You put the apron on the hook. I said it simply. You told me to make myself useful. I did. Her jaw tightened. The fight in her face was trying to find its purchase and not finding it, because the argument required me to have done something wrong, and the argument kept sliding off the facts. We have nowhere to go tonight, she said finally, and it came out smaller than she intended. There are rooms available at the Aspen Lodge in town. I've already arranged for a car to take you there. I looked around the table. Tonight and tomorrow night are covered. You can book your flights home from the concierge. You're paying for our hotel, Ryan said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes. He looked at me for a long moment. His face was very tired, not the performed tiredness of someone wanting sympathy, but the real exhaustion of a person who has been sustaining a complicated fiction and has just been relieved of the effort. Thank you, he said. It came out plainly, without anything underneath it except that it was true. Trevor stood without being asked. He smoothed the front of his jacket, a gesture so automatic it seemed almost involuntary. The muscle memory of a man who had always believed the jacket mattered, and he picked up the folder from the table and he looked at it for a moment and then he set it back down. I'll call the lawyer in January, he said, about the repayment. His name is on the last page, I said. He nodded. He didn't look at me again. He walked to the door, and one of the security team moved quietly beside him, and they went down the hall. Helena stood. She looked across the table at me with an expression I didn't have a name for. It was several things at once, and some of them were things I had never seen on her face before, and I could not in good conscience tell you how much of it was real and how much was the last available performance of a woman whose audience had finally learned to look past the performance. She reached across the table as though she might touch my hand. I didn't move my hand. "Leo and Maya," she said. "I have Christmas presents for them, in the bag." I looked at her. "I bought them before," she stopped. "I want them to have them." "You can leave them with the car service," I said. "Claire will make sure they have them in the morning." Her hand, which had been extended across the table, came back to herself. She held it against her chest briefly, as though it had been cold. "I love you," she said. "I know you do," I said, "in the way you know how." She went to the door. She didn't look back. Elodie left without saying anything, which was its own kind of statement. Ryan went last, slowly, with his hands at his sides and his eyes on the floor, the walk of a man with a great deal to think about and the knowledge that the thinking would take a long time. The front door opened. The winter came in briefly. The front door closed. Colton had been standing near the far wall throughout all of this, as still and unobtrusive as someone can be in a room where history is being made. He looked at me now with the expression of a man who has just been present at something significant and is not entirely sure what his role in it was. "I owe you a genuine apology," he said, "for coming here without—" "You were deceived," I said. "You don't owe me an apology for that. I owe you one for not doing better due diligence." He said it with the directness of someone used to being accountable for his analysis. In my professional life, I would consider that a serious error. "Then consider it noted," I said, "and consider it addressed at our January meeting." He looked at me, a clear, assessing look, the kind that takes a person in without pretense. "You gave me a chance to stay and hear that conversation." "Yes." "Why?" I thought about it. "Because I thought it might be useful for you to see how this family operates," I said. "You were about to become more entangled with it. Now you have the information to make your own choices." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, "Thank you." "Merry Christmas, Colton." "Merry Christmas, Sienna." He took his coat from the entryway and he walked out through the front door, and I heard his car start up and move down the heated driveway and the gate at the bottom register the motion and swing open and closed. And then there was silence. I stood in the dining room for a while, not doing anything, just standing. The candles on the table had burned down into themselves, and the chandelier light was the warmest thing in the room, and the fire was low but still going. The wine stain on the tablecloth had dried to the color of old ink. I had thought for a long time that this moment would feel like something specific. Triumph, maybe, or relief, or the specific satisfaction of an account finally settled. What it actually felt like was very quiet, like a room after a piece of furniture you'd grown used to is removed. Not empty exactly, but spacious in a way that takes time to learn to inhabit. I blew out the candles. I walked through the house toward the living room and stopped in the doorway. Alexandra was on the sofa with her legs tucked under her and a cup of tea in both hands, looking into the fireplace. She had found the tea herself, which meant she had found the kitchen, which was the kind of practical, self-sufficient thing she did without making anything of it. She looked up when I appeared. "I thought you might have taken a car," I said. "The roads are closed until morning. Storm moved in about an hour ago." She nodded toward the windows where the snow was doing something serious against the glass. "I asked one of your security team. He said I was welcome to stay if you agreed." "Of course you're welcome to stay." I sat down in the armchair across from her. "I'm glad you're here." She looked at me with the direct, uncomplicated look she used when she meant something exactly as it appeared. "Are you all right?" I considered the question honestly. "Yes," I said. "I think so. It's a strange thing. You prepare for something for a long time, and then it happens, and it's different from how you prepared for it. Not worse, just different." "Different how?" "Quieter," I said. "I thought I would feel more. When my mother said she loved me, when my father said he'd call the lawyer." I looked at the fire. I felt the words. I just didn't feel changed by them. That's not the same as not feeling anything. "No," I agreed, "it's not." We sat in the warmth of the fire for a while without speaking, which was not an uncomfortable silence, but a settled one. The kind that happens between people who have been through something together and don't need to keep processing it out loud to know that they have both processed it. The ring, I said. I'm sorry about that. She shook her head slightly. Don't be. I'd been knowing for 2 months I needed the documentation. She looked into her tea. That's probably a depressing thing to say about the end of a relationship. It's an honest thing to say. It is. A pause. I think I loved who I thought he was. That person would have been worth it. She was quiet for a moment. He might still become that person someday, if he does enough thinking. He might, I said, but not for me to wait for. No? She nodded as though that were a question she'd been carrying all evening and had just now set down. From the top of the stairs, the sound of small, rapid footsteps. I stood up. Leo appeared at the top of the staircase in his Christmas pajamas, red and green plaid, slightly too big at the wrists, blinking against the light and holding the banister with one hand. Mom. He said it with the precise urgency of very small children who have something important to report. Maya says the movie finished and Santa hasn't come yet because it's not midnight, but she wants to know if we can come downstairs and wait. You can absolutely come downstairs, I said. He turned. Maya, and a pause, and then the sound of Maya appearing from the cinema room in her own pajamas. Peanut the elephant tucked under one arm, her hair doing the specific architectural thing it did when she'd been reclining in a chair for 2 hours. They came down the stairs together, Leo deliberate, Maya in the contained, barely running way of a 4-year-old who has been instructed not to run on stairs and is respecting this technically while pushing all available limits. They reached the bottom, and Leo went to me immediately, pressing his head against my side in the silent, habitual way he had used since he could walk, and I put my hand on the top of his head. Maya noticed Alexandra and regarded her with the frank assessment of someone who has not yet learned to pretend evaluation is not happening. You're the lady from before, Maya said. I am, Alexandra said. Are you staying? Tonight, yes. Maya considered this. Peanut says that's fine, she said, and climbed up onto the sofa beside Alexandra with the complete unself-consciousness of a 4-year-old who has decided, in the total and immediate way of small children, that someone is acceptable. Alexandra looked at the elephant, then at Maya, then at me, with a slightly wide-eyed look that was the closest I had seen her come to being undone all evening. I smiled at her. I built the fire back up and got the Christmas blankets from the closet off the hall, the good ones, the ones Claire put away in October and brought out only now. And I made cocoa for everyone, 4 mugs with the marshmallows Leo had been requesting since we landed. I turned off the overhead lights so the only illumination was the fire and the Christmas tree in the corner, which was lit with warm white bulbs and decorated exactly as I had specified, in the colors of cream and gold. Leo arranged himself between me and the armrest with his cocoa balanced very carefully on his knee, watching the tree with the serious, evaluating attention he gave to most beautiful things. Maya had inserted herself under Alexandra's arm at some point, without anyone marking the transition, and Alexandra was sitting with what appeared to be genuine stillness. Not the controlled stillness of a lawyer, but the simple, unperforming stillness of a person who is exactly where she is. Outside, the snow moved against the glass in long, sweeping curtains, and the world outside was completely white and completely quiet. And inside, the fire made its sound, and the tree made its light, and my children were warm. I sat with my cocoa and I looked at the room. I thought about the girl who had driven home from her father's rejection and sat in a parking garage for 20 minutes before going upstairs to feed her children. I thought about the nights she had worked past midnight in an office that smelled like takeout and industrial cleaning solution, the stack of files on her left and the cold coffee on her right, building the architecture of something that did not yet exist. I thought about all the years she had kept her name off the press releases and her face out of the photographs, not because she was ashamed, but because she had learned, early and clearly, that the work was the thing, that the work existed independent of anyone's acknowledgement of it, and that building quietly meant building without anyone else's permission. I thought about my mother on the phone 3 days ago. Your whole situation isn't exactly the image we need, and I thought, the image was never the point. The image was what you had when you didn't have the thing itself. I had the thing itself. Mom, Leo said without looking away from the tree. Yes. Is tomorrow Christmas? When you wake up? Yes. He thought about this. Will we build a snowman? First thing. A big one? The biggest one, I said, bigger than both of us. He considered the structural implications of this, briefly, and then nodded with the air of someone who has run the numbers and found them satisfactory. Maya was asleep against Alexandra's arm. Peanut had been repositioned at some point so that his cloth head was tucked under Maya's chin. Alexandra was not asleep, but she was close. Her breathing had slowed, and her eyes had half closed, and she had the quality of someone letting themselves rest in a way they hadn't in a while. The fire went on doing what fires do. I held my cocoa in both hands, and I looked at the Christmas tree, and I let myself sit with it. This room, this particular configuration of light and warmth, and these specific people, without trying to make it mean more than it was, or protect myself from how much it meant. Family is not a matter of last names or legal documents or the accident of a shared bloodline. I know that now, the way I know things, I learned the hard way, not as a comfort, but as a truth, earned and permanent. Family is who shows up, who stays when there's nothing convenient in staying, who sits with you in the firelight on a December night after everything has been said and doesn't need to fill the silence because the silence is not empty. It is full of everything that doesn't need saying. I had been told my whole life that I was less than what I was, that my children were too loud, too much, too present, that my life was a liability to someone else's image. I had built an empire in the margins of that lie. And tonight, in the last hours before Christmas morning, I sat in the house that empire built, with my son's head warm against my shoulder and the snow coming down beyond the glass, and a woman I had known for one evening already feeling somehow like someone I had been waiting to meet. And I understood that the real work had never been the buildings or the portfolios or the acquisitions. The real work had been this, getting here, protecting this, and I had done it. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for the comments, the messages, the notes from people who told me they heard their own lives in the parts of it. You are why I keep telling these stories. You remind me that none of us are as alone in these things as we sometimes feel. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the one who was written off, overlooked, or made to feel like a liability in the place that was supposed to be your safest, please hit the like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories coming. Stories about building when no one believes in the build. About walking away from the table you were never really invited to. About what it means to make your own place. I'll be here. Take care of yourselves. And if you're somewhere cold tonight, I hope you're warm.